maybe we'll get started, and maybe we'll just do that with an introduction to Sophie, and like kind of what we're doing today. So it'll be like a 20-minute kind of presentation, and then we'll have time for question and answers at the end. So kind of save them up or pop them in the chat or pop your hand up if you want to ask them at the end. We'll definitely have the time. But so we're joined today by Sophie. Thank you. Welcome. Hi. For those of you who don't know, Sophie's book, The Contradictions, came out earlier this year, which was the print version of what started as a webcomic. And it's, I mean, just one book in a series of books that have been released. Sophie, do you want to kind of take it from here?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I have been familiar with SAW for a long time. One of my good friends spent, I think, a semester there, or I don't know how you guys do it, but it seems like a super cool place, but I have not been down yet. Let's see, I will share this. Can y'all see that? Yeah. Cool. So I'm just sort of gonna do a pretty linear run through of making comics in my life. Yeah, so that's me. I like to start with this slide because I don't know how many of you would be familiar with the online blogging platform LiveJournal. It was pretty popular around like 2003. In retrospect, thinking back on my sort of writing practice, I feel like online journaling is kind of where I developed like a writing voice, and also where I first started to write with the intention of other people reading it. And, you know, at the time it was just like, whatever, I'm writing about my life. But if I look back on some of those entries, I was definitely like trying to craft like, you know, poetry. And it was just like a great, you know, you got like immediate feedback, and it was the sort of, you could do long form stuff. And yeah, so that's me as a teen on my webcam. And yeah, that was it was formative. In high school, I discovered the work of Gabrielle Bell, who you can see on the left there. I was reading her, some like Love and Rockets, Adrian Tomina. And those were kind of the things where, you know, I had read comics as a little kid, but that's where I was kind of like, whoa, you can like make comics by your life. Like, wow. On the right is, here, I'm gonna, actually, I forgot to start my timer. So on the right is, when I went to college, I studied printmaking primarily. So that is something, a woodcut that I did in school. And I was in like a studio art program, and there was one teacher who was like interested in comics, but had never really made them himself. But I was lucky in that he let me do some independent studies with him. But you can see anyway in the prints, I was basically sort of making these like visual comics anyway. And I was sort of thinking about thinking, I don't know, it's like, yeah, but I was sort of using the visual language of comics in the prints. A pretty formative moment for me was I studied abroad in France for a semester when I was in school, which is partially what The Contradictions is based on, that time in my life. But I don't at all mention the fact that when I, you know, well, anyway, it's fictionalized, but one of the things that happened actually when I was in France was I went to the Angoulême Comics Festival. And it was amazing. That was another thing that was through LiveJournal. Erica Moen, on her LiveJournal, she had told me at a party, I had met her, and she was like, oh, if you're going to France, you should go to Angoulême. And later I like typed on her LiveJournal, was like, hey, I'm going to France, and Angoulême is during the time I'm going to be there. And then somebody who lived in Angoulême replied to my comment and was like, if you want to crash on our floor when you come here, like, you can do that. And I was just like, what? And she was a student at the school. And back in the day, the students would make fake passes. So she made me a fake professional pass, and I got to go get into all of the all of the professional parties with all these French francophone cartoonists. So I was like 20. And yeah, I mean, that was pretty pretty amazing, and kind of like, I was like, wow, I want to be a part of this. Like, this is so cool. And I was, at that time, I had discovered the work of GP, who I thought was a French cartoonist. He's Italian, but but I was really excited about European comics, and yeah, so that was a moment. After I graduated from school, I got a job at a comic shop in Berkeley. This was Comic Relief. It was this amazing shop for like 25 years. And that was kind of, I feel like, where I got a lot of my comics education. I kind of walked into that job. I had started a comics library at college, kind of taking inspiration from the Reed comics library. I got a bunch of donations with a friend, and anyway, it was great. But I walked into this job being like, I know all there is to know about comics, so no big deal. And everybody was like, boom, like, read these. So so this was awesome, because I got like a really broad education in stuff that I hadn't read and probably would never have engaged with. But it was also cool because I became the small press buyer while I was there. And through that, I got to meet all of these cool, like, indie comics publishers, or meet, but interact with, email with. And occasionally they would come in, people like Dylan Williams, who ran Sparkplug Comics. He had been the small press buyer like years prior. And I also met, I also like engaged with Tom Kaczynski from Uncivilized Books, which will come up later in this tale. So yeah, that was really pretty key. I was making comics at the time. So I had started, in college, doing the independent studies stuff. And this is what the work looked like at the time. And I think it's kind of interesting because my comics didn't look like, after this point, my comics didn't look like that for a long time. And then, but I feel like now the stuff with the Contradictions looks much more like that. And there's kind of a reason for that. So I ended up doing a publicity internship with Jack Cohen.
All right,
oh.
How are you?
Oh, sorry. I ended up doing a publicity internship at Fantagraphics.
Watching a Zoom presentation.
And
sorry, wait.
Does
everyone want to make sure they're muted? I think someone's kind of jumping on accidentally.
Yeah.
I think Sarah is unmuted.
Sarah. Okay, let's see if we can try again. Sophie, it's all you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I did this publicity internship at Fantagraphics. That's actually, I was living in Seattle for like 4 months. And that's when I met Stevie. Because I started going to a drink and draw while I was there. But one of the really important things that happened while I was at Fantagraphics is I showed my work to Eric Reynolds, who's one of the editors there. And he was kind of like, I heard him later, it was conveyed to me that his thoughts were like, well, she knows how to draw, but she really needs to like find her voice. So, and I took that was like, okay, this is my guiding light now. So while I was in Seattle, I ended up finding this sort of pseudo residency in Montreal, and my French was like barely passable, but I could read the call out. So I submitted and I got accepted to do this like 3-month residency at a studio there. And so gearing up for that, I was like, okay, like I need to like get into, I wasn't in this routine of like really making comics. So I was like, Gabrielle Bell was doing this 30-day challenge to herself, which later became this sort of annual or biannual thing that she does. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. So so I started doing that. I was also, oh yeah, I had done this like 30-page full color fiction comic that I still can't bring myself to show yet, but it was this sci-fi thing, and I spent a really long time making it, and then I hated it. This was before I went to Fantagraphics. But I still had it in my mind that I was like going to make fiction. And so I was doing these journal comics, but they were just an exercise, like, it's just like to get the rest off. And I got to the studio. It was this awesome place. Like we would have all these we'd have shared meals. It was cartoonist in Montreal, and Montreal at the time was extremely cheap. So I think it was possible for a lot of people to be, working part-time and like doing comics full time if they had progressed and, being actually able to like live their lives. So there was, so there was like a cool community there. But while I was there, I kind of realized that the journal comics were actually becoming my comics practice in a way that I had not expected. So yeah, this is the crew at one point. And then while I was there, I was planning to move back to California. Or no, I decided to stay. And I was freelancing, doing graphic design for a place in San Francisco. The student strike happened. And that ended up we ended up as a collective. This place, Colos, was a collective that came out of that studio, and it had been in existence for like 10 years. But so we ended up making these zines that was like every week during the strike. We would put out a zine, and it was just like whoever wanted to contribute a couple of pages. And that was this cool thing. We had no idea how long it would last. It lasted for actually many months. This isn't even the full duration of it. But it was just a cool thing that we did. And then I also ended up making all these journal comics that we collected into my first book. Technically, it has a tiny spine. And it was this cool thing because Colos, although it was like a collective, it was basically like, we all would just sort of like make our own stuff and then publish it under the same name. And they had been doing this long before I was there, but it gave a sort of credence to the stuff, to the point where like at TCAF, there's like on the bottom floor, it's primarily publishers, and they give the good booths to like the publishers, and Colos would get one of those sweet booths like right up at the front, because it was like, we're a publisher. So anyway, I made this book, and then I went down to Comic Arts Brooklyn that year, and Tom Kaczynski was there with Uncivilized Books, which at the time was only publishing like stapled zines, basically, nice ones, like they had silkscreen covers and stuff. But I gave him the In Situ book, and we had interacted prior when I was the small press buyer, and he really was into it, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to do a book? I'm actually becoming a publisher. I'm going to start publishing books." So that was how I got my first offer to do a book. And then, I kept publishing these zines. After we did the book with the spine, I started doing these. And I this was great. This design I'm still very proud of, because it looks kind of fancy, but it's just photocopies with like one cut and like a little extra cardstock. And I could sell it for $5, and it cost me like 50 cents. So maybe $1. So it was good. And it meant that I was tabling at these festivals, and I was actually like making some money because I had like a zine that, I guess it's a little bit like, well, I don't know. I won't get into like zines versus other mini comics versus whatever, but so then I was just, still making comics. This is one that I did. You can see I was sort of like experimenting with art styles. But I guess, yeah, one of the important things related to the Eric Reynolds comment earlier was I was trying not to work in a way that was so labor intensive, like how I had been doing previously. Like that first comic I showed you, the page that I showed you with with the Fantagraphics logo next to it, that was like done on 11 by 17, you know, inked with like a nib pen or like an art pen, wrought ring art pen. And yeah, it was just like very like labor intensive relative to these pages, which were done on, you know, 8.5 by 11, slightly thicker than normal printer paper, basically. So, and that I think was really helpful for me in learning how to write and just like learning how to make comics that had flow, instead of sort of laboring over making it look, you know, real nice. So then I put out this book with Tom at Uncivilized. It was sort of my recounting of the student strike, which I had participated in, not as a student, but sort of supporting and trying to document, and then mixed with sort of reflections about urban planning and the history of like militarism and how it's linked to contemporary urban planning. So yeah, put that out with Tom. And then I got a fellowship at the Center for Cartoon Studies and moved down there from Montreal, started making, I think because of the War Streets and Houses book, I started getting, you know, people who were more interested in, who were asking me to do stuff. So the NIB asked me to do some stuff, or maybe I think I pitched them, but I just kind of was like, okay, maybe I'll try this nonfiction thing. And yeah, those are just a few little places that I did stuff for at the time. And yeah, so I did the fellowship, and then I ended up deciding CCS was able to do a thing where they could credit my fellowship year and put me, I decided I wanted to try teaching. So I was like, well, I'll get an MFA. And they were able to put me into the second year. Yeah, during that time, I also did some translation. I translated Faire semblant c'est mentir, Pretending is Lying by Dominique Goblet, which later won a major translation award, which I didn't, which was cool. And yeah, and so during my fellowship and then during my thesis year, the second year of my MFA, I was working on what would become the Contradictions. So if you've seen the book, I'll show you this page in a minute, but this is this is a version of it from when I was working on it as a student. And again, I was still trying to figure out, like, I don't know what style I want to do this in. And so this was what I thought the finished pages would look like. I was like, okay, it's going to be kind of this, you know, pencil version. So I finished up my MFA, and then I ended up teaching at CCS. And while I was teaching, I also was doing sort of like reportage for the NIB. So I went to Standing Rock. I went to the RNC, the Cleveland RNC. I went to the Trump inauguration, and I did, you know, these like reportage. Like Cleveland, I was there for 5 days, and I did a piece every day. And Standing Rock also. Yeah, I can talk about that later if people are curious how that goes down. But and then I also had been asked by Box Brown at Retrofit to do a comic. And so I did this weird comic that is sort of a meditation on like death and climate change and a breakup. Yeah, it still was quite loose. And I think, you know, really looked like the Horror of Streets and Houses stuff. So I taught for a few years at CCS, and then I decided that I wanted to move back to California to be closer to my family. So moved back here, and then was freelancing and working on what would become the Contradictions. So I actually pitched it to Drawn and Quarterly before I started it as a webcomic, and I said, hey, I want to do this as a webcomic. I want to release this online for free. Are you guys down to like publish it if I do that? And yeah, they wanted to do the book, and they were on board with that. So yeah, so I worked on it, and you can see, so this is what that earlier page ended up looking like, the sort of final way that I decided to ink the book. And this was drawn with like a micron on Bristol. So kind of after all of that arc, I finally came back and was like, okay, I know how to make comics. I know how to have flow. I know what my voice is a little bit better. Now I want to kind of see if I can make the drawings, like focus on the drawings and have it all work together and see how that goes. And it was really cool. Like during this process, I got way better at drawing. It was just really awesome to sort of see how I could continue to progress in that way. Right now I haven't figured out, so the Contradictions was kind of an albatross for me. I had wanted to do some version of that story since I had studied in France. So when I finished it, I kind of was like, well, I don't really know what stories I want to tell right now. So what I've been doing lately is learning how to storyboard for animation, because that's something that I'm curious about, and trying to let ideas percolate. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. I'm not sure. So yeah, that's that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sophie. Is that kind of the end of your presentation with questions?
Yeah, we can do questions.
Wonderful.
Talk about any of that. Or...
Thank you so much. I know Jess has been keeping track of the questions as we've kind of been going.
So, yeah, I haven't looked at the chat, so
I'm going to hand it over to her to kind of lead us through that.
Okay, I have a few I've kept track of. I don't know how savvy I am. Well, we're so happy to have you here, Sophie. Thanks for being here, and it was so cool to see your work and hear more about your process. We'll have more questions in the chat kind of popping up, but some of the earlier ones that came up as you were talking, and we have like a hive mind here, so some of the participants have answered this, but we'd love to hear what you think. Zine versus comic versus mini comic. What does it mean? What's a zine?
Well, I think there's kind of a, I guess I would say that some folks who sort of like originated in the zine, in the sort of like punk zine scene would be like, a zine shouldn't cost more than $1. So that's kind of, I guess it's kind of like an economic like object thing where I feel like that object was no longer a zine as soon as I started trying to make money with it, kind of, you know.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so that's all I meant by that.
Yeah, totally. And then and I think there's some similar comments in the chat of like what everyone was sort of defining it, but we're all kind of coming to a consensus like, yeah, what is the difference? So some of the people here are newcomers or even latecomers or just come as you are, and it's good to like get definitions from professionals about stuff because it can feel a little weird to be new to something and like not know what I mean. Like you kind of have an idea, but you're like, am I using the wrong word for this thing? So thanks.
Yeah, I feel like the zine is honestly really firmly in the domain of the unprofessional, right? It's like no, like this is ours, like, you know.
Yeah, it's sort of proud of itself in that way, the lowbrow. Yeah, totally. Good point. And I like your point about the economics of it. That's true. It's very much rooted in a DIY, low budget aesthetic.
Yeah, and like I would say, like I could still make a zine, and I have made zines. It was just sort of, I think, depends on the intent and.
Yeah, totally. Another question was how to apply to residencies. Like, what was your experience applying to residencies? And were those residencies comic specific? Did you seek out comic specific residencies?
Yeah, so the residency that I did in Montreal was very DIY. It was basically just a studio, residency. It was a studio space in a shared studio. They were like, here's a table. And yeah, and that was really just a question of like, they were like, submit your stuff and maybe like we'll say that you can come here. And I've done, so I'd say it's a spectrum. Most recently, I did a fellowship at the MacDowell Colony, which was amazing. They cook meals for you like three times a day. You get like meal delivery at lunch. You each have your own separate studio space, and people aren't allowed to visit you unless you invite them.
Is it true that they deliver the lunch in a basket to your front
Yes.
door?
Yeah, it comes in a basket. The cooks, I mean, it was the most luxury I've experienced in my entire life. Yeah. And I got to go for a month and they paid me to be there.
And that's not a comics. So it's called MacDowell. I'll type it in the chat for those of you that are curious about it. And it's not comic specific. It's been around for a very long time. It's hosted, I think, like Flannery O'Connor and like Carson McCullers and like older writers of
yeah. I mean, the list is amazing. It's not just writers, it's like architects, composers,
oh cool,
filmmakers. Yeah. So when I was there, it was like this amazing, group of people, and you spend 2 meals together, like where you share the meals, and you get to know each other, and people do presentations on the work that they're working on. And when I was there, Mimi Pond was also there.
Oh, cool.
And I think she was there was another guy there who's making comics, who's sort of an interdisciplinary artist, but it was also the year that they give out an award every year, and they gave it to Art Spiegelman. So so specifically like MacDowell, I think they're sort of beginning to have this more progressive thing of like comics is art. And so I think that only probably in the last 5 years or so have they been like more regularly accepting cartoonists. I know Julia Wirtz has gone. I don't know. I can't. But anyway, like Julia Wirtz, she makes like just hilarious and also often extremely crude comics. So it's not just this like super highbrow stuff. So yeah, and that was something where you had to apply, and I had a letter of recommendation from someone who had been. So I think that was definitely helpful. There's a website that lists a bunch of residencies. There's one called there's one in, I want to say Virginia, it's VCCA or something. I don't know. There's a few that are kind of in the fine arts circuit or the writing circuit. People know like, oh, these are the sweet ones where they like serve you food. But there's also there's also ones where it's like, okay, you get a free space, and then down to, okay, you're paying to be here. Which can still be, if it's less than the cost of rent, it can still be pretty amazing. So
that's a good point, that not all residencies are bespoke picnic basket.
Yeah, I mean, that MacDowell is like the creme de la creme of
you want to go to one that feeds you and pays you and respects your time. But there are a lot of writers residencies where you pay and you go and you spend like $1,000 and you write in the desert for a week or something. So if you have the income and you feel like it's worth it, totally go for it. But it's really nice when someone pays for you.
Yeah, but also I would say like in Europe, it's actually much more common to have the paid residencies. It's quite common. And so I get an email from the Maison des Auteurs, which is in Angoulême, and they list the paid residencies like every month. So if you speak French or can read French, that's a cool resource that I haven't gotten the chance to take advantage of, but yeah.
Really awesome. Someone asked how to publish a mini comic, just generally.
Well, get access to a photocopying machine or a printer that's toner based, and get a long arm stapler. And I mean, you know, during the COVID era, when it's harder to have shows, you know, post it on Twitter that you made a comic. And I would say when we can have shows again, I saw that Mini Mice just happened, and like
I
one of my
just moved to
friends.
Boston. It's like down the street, and it rained, and my back hurt, and so I didn't even get to see it. But there were all these posters. I was like, ah! But yeah,
That's a bummer. But yeah, Kathy Johnson, my friend, just tabled at that, and she was like, "This was the best show, literally, as far as financially, it was the best show she's like ever done."
Wow.
So anyway, people want to buy comics.
Yeah.
If you can make you know, make a mini comic, and
just make it.
You can also find, you know, there are distributors of our mini comics. So Radiator Comics is one. There's this guy named Tony Shenton. I don't know how active he is these days, but he is in touch with the whole network of comic shops. And you can say, I have this mini comic, I want to put it out. You give him sort of like a PDF fact sheet with like some pictures from it, and he'll send it out to shops for you. And then you interact with them and sell them directly. But he takes a small cut. But yeah, there's definitely these sort of direct market networks. I'll put Tony Shenton in the chat.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Thanks. So Vanessa Martinez is asking, Sophie, could you talk about your experience integrating politics into your comics? This is something I want to do, but I'm scared of because I feel like I don't know enough, and I'm overwhelmed by the vastness of political literature.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, my approach to it has always been sort of like asking questions and trying to answer them in my comics, like both posing the question and then sort of documenting the attempt to resolve the question, because I would not say I'm an expert in any kind of political discourse. But I'm curious, you know, and I feel an obligation to understand the world. So yeah, that's been my way of doing things. It was, you know, it was hard, like going to Standing Rock and being like, okay, I'm this white person showing up, you know, as a journalist, and the history of that. And so I just tried to do as much legwork as I could before showing up there, so that I wasn't just like, you know, some rando who like didn't really know anything about anything. You know, I think that it's hard because I've sort of taken a step back from quote unquote journalism, because yeah, I don't know, the whole question of like, what is journalism and what is editorializing, and it's complicated. And I haven't really figured out for myself where exactly I want to be, you know, if I want to be saying this is what I think is right and true, and but I still think that sort of, yeah, asking questions and seeking to answer them that's just the only way that I've felt comfortable doing that.
I second that. Amen. I agree with that. That's good. Someone in the chat said curiosity is such a good and underrated driver of action, especially in comics and nonfiction stuff. I like that you're honest about what you know and what you want to know, and like let that curiosity kind of put gas in your tank when you're unsure of your knowledge and abilities. I think that's such a good way to navigate, especially nonfiction stuff. But I also sometimes I tell myself, I'm like, well, there's plenty of people who don't know anything about anything that say all kinds of stuff. So I think in my head, I'm like, the bar is probably lower out there. And the fact that I want to do well and I care about getting it right is probably good.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, but it's, you know, it's it can be hard. I mean, it was hard for me. It was a constant learning process, getting feedback from folks who I had written about, and just realizing your blind spots. And yeah, definitely a growing process. And yeah, it's not easy, I guess would be, or it hasn't been for me. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Thanks so much. We have another student, Elise, asked, when you work on a long project like the Contradictions, how much writing / planning do you do beforehand, and how much do you do as you go along? Did you know how it would end already when you started that project?
Yeah. So that book, I did know how it would end, more or less. I knew, I don't want to spoil anything for if folks haven't read it, but I knew the sort of second to last scene. I was like, this is where we're going to wind up. And that's because that exact moment had actually sort of happened for me. And I built the story around, I tried to build the story around having this moment at the end where there's no dialogue and there's no text, but I really wanted I wanted you to understand like what's going through the character's head as this action is being taken. So I kind of, with that in mind, that's sort of how I ended up fictionalizing it, because I needed to construct the scenes that would sort of get you there. Because like in reality, in my real life, those scenes that would explain that didn't actually happen in this particular like linear order in France while I was, having this type of experience. So, but yeah, I did that book. I thumbnailed, or no, I thumbnailed. I drew on printer paper these sort of super loose, it kind of in the style of my journal comics, or the War Streets and Houses stuff, just like loose. And I write that way. So I just draw like a 6-panel grid and I just write into it and draw into it, for that anyway. And then from there, I kind of figure out moments where I want to like break the grid, where I want to like have it feel more open. But I like to sort of lay down that platform first. But yeah, I mean, that was the first book that I actually did that way. Previous books I had kind of done just drawing various scenes and then sort of figuring out an order for them to go in, because they were a little bit more, they were more memoir. I wasn't going for like a story arc in the same way. So yeah.
Nice, cool. Jeff is asking, what is your process for pitching stories to publishers? What's your process? Is it general or specific? Have they traditionally dictated how you deal with them? Do you just focus on people you've worked with before and liked, or do you also seek out new publishers for new ideas? A lot of questions, like 3 questions.
So my history with pitching has been so like loosey-goosey, I guess. Because with Tom, he was like, hey, do you want to do a book? And I was like, okay, I'll come up with an idea. And I kind of doing the journal comics is what helped me to figure out what the idea was that I wanted to write about, because I kind of looked at what I was drawing and I was like, oh, these are the ideas I'm thinking about. Let's pitch something out of that. So yeah, I was like, I want to do something that's sort of about architecture and militarism and the student strike. And he was like, cool, sounds good. And I think I could only be so loosey-goosey in that way because I had been putting out comics and he knew what my comics looked like. So he was able to be like, okay, when she says this and it's vague, I can actually sort of imagine it because I've seen this sort of concrete version. And I think the same thing was true with Retrofit. Box was like, hey, I like your comics. Do you want to do a thing? And I was like, how about this? And he was like, cool, great. With D&Q, it was much more, I had the entire thing thumbnailed and I had some sample pages and I sent it to them. And I did have an agent by the time I didn't have an agent for Uncivilized or Retrofit. As for other stuff, I think if I don't know, there's some stuff that I that I'm sort of exploring that might not fit with any of the publishers that I've had. I had a great experience with D&Q, so I think, yeah, I don't know exactly what's next, but I am not averse to if it's something that really doesn't fit the mold to going, taking a project elsewhere, but I feel like it's sort of project by project.
So you have a good sense at all times, like what your interests are and curiosities are, and then also you're more and more familiar with like who publishes what and who you like hanging out with, and you're like, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, I like that person. We should all get that together. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Another question. We don't know if this is true. It might just be a rumor, but did you just help Allison Bechtel with her latest book? And what did that look like? OMG.
Yes, I did do that.
Yay.
So I've actually been helping Allison. I'm not really working with her so much post the book, but I've been doing assistant work for her for like 4 years or something. The latest project I did was I did the like production artist part of the book. So I came up with the help of my friend John Chad, came up with the way that we would color it, and she wanted to do CMYK, so we figured out a way for her to like scan these gray tones, and her wife Holly Ray Taylor ended up painting the gray tones, so she would paint the CMY and like a gray layer, and then they would scan them, send them to me with the line art. I would assemble everything, colorize everything, and make corrections to the colors. So it was a long and grueling process, but I think it looks good. So I'm super happy with how it turned out.
Did y'all like work remotely, or like she would email you something and then you would?
Yeah. So we would, once we kind of got in the rhythm, we were just emailing, but like we would Skype a lot. And sometimes we would just have days where we like, where we were just like on Skype together for like 5 hours while we tried to figure out stuff, where I would be like, okay, like, how about this? And,
how about that? Cool. It sounds really collaborative, like even though you're, it sounds almost like a classic apprenticeship or something. Like, a lot and you're bringing your expertise, and there's like this maybe mutual respect, but also like you're like anything you want.
Yeah. No, it was good.
Really cool. That's awesome. And you guys both live in Vermont, right?
So I live in California now. I was working for her like in person for a couple of years while I was, or for a year while I was still in Vermont.
When you were in Vermont, that's how y'all met.
And then now that I'm back in California, I've continued to work for her on a variety of projects.
Amazing. Very cool. Congrats. That's badass to help master artists be even cooler than they are. Dan Finley's asking, how do you think your voice changed from your encounter with Eric Reynolds to now? That's a great question, Dan.
I think like the comic that the comics that I showed Eric, there was that one and there was like another one. And I feel like they were a little bit like an indie film with nothing really to say. They were kind of like cool and like moody, but it's just like very vague musings on like life. And I think, and like, another one that I showed him, it was just kind of like, it had like some like symbolism in it that was not really, it just didn't make a lot of, not very concrete in the ideas. I think like, I kind of went from that to being like hyper specific, and so then like from writing about my life, that I feel like that's how I kind of learned like, oh, like even if I'm doing fiction or if I'm doing something that's like a little bit vague, like having these really specific things that I'm talking about, for me, like that's been a way of, I don't know, fleshing out the writing. And I think it's, that's an improvement. But I mean, but also, I've also eventually, started to try to understand fiction and in ways that I haven't really in the past. So it's been it's ongoing.
Nice. Jim Hamilton's asking, seems like you've traveled, he gets a little philosophical. It seems like you have traveled this vast philosophical journey from $1 zines that aren't intended to make a lot of money all the way to money-making projects with ISBN sold through Amazon. What do you take from this as you look back on the journey? Like a rags to riches.
Yeah, I certainly haven't reached the riches part. I was working, I was working for a nonprofit for like 6 months this year where I was like, maybe I want to try this out. But I don't know. I mean, I think that approaching it from, I kind of just started out approaching it from like, I love comics and I want to make comics, and I want to keep my cost of living as low as possible so that I can make whatever I want. And like living in Montreal, my rent was like $270 a month.
Amazing.
So it was bonkers, but yeah, I mean, things, I also didn't understand compound interest or
Susan's also saying you moved back to California.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So part of why I'm like looking into animation now is because I'm back here and my parents are getting old, and I want to stay here, and so I have sort of had to change priorities. And but one of the things is I'm kind of like, I don't want the primary motive for my comics work to be financial. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to keep drawing, keep doing like visual storytelling, and also make my comics. And if I have, a book that does gangbusters, like that'd be cool. But that's not with my comics work. That's not the primary drive, even though I feel at this point that I could pitch some stuff and probably get a decent advance and live off of it, but would it be the book I want to do? I don't know. So I'm trying to sort of figure out if maybe there's a book that I can pitch that would give me a decent advance and would also be the book I want to do. I just haven't figured that out quite yet.
It's hard because even when you're like, you do have a moment that's commercially successful, it's really hard to sustain because there are all these individual moments. It's not like, oh, I work as a dentist or a federal employee and I collect my pension and I do
Right.
It's like you're hopping from moment to moment, which is probably part of the thrill and excitement of it too, because you can always kind of calibrate. We had Sam Alden here. I don't know if you know him, and he was like
we were actually roommates in Montreal.
Oh yeah, totally. Funny, you spoke nicely of Montreal, and he was like, I was so depressed. But he said there were nice people there. So yeah, thanks for keeping Sam together for us. But yeah, he was like, he would do like the opposite of whatever he just finished, like because he was like, I don't want to do that anymore. So that can kind of be really cool. It's like just trying to figure stuff out. But someone was asking, I missed it. Let me scroll back up. I think Emma was curious about, oh yeah, why did the Contradictions kind of need to be a webcomic first? Do you want to talk about that?
I just felt like, given the sort of content of it and the exploration of sort of anarchism and socialism, communism, it's sort of, if you haven't read it, it partially deals with kind of like trying to live certain ideals. And so that was part of it. I just felt like content wise, I just wanted to like give it away for free, at least for a while. But also in terms of just like cold hard economics, putting a webcomic up is content marketing. So like I realized that with, one thing I didn't mention is that with the mini comics, I was putting all of the journal comics online for free the whole time. I would just put them up, and they weren't collected. They were just as they came. It was kind of just in a blog. And then I would sell the copies of the comics and people would buy them. So it was like, well, if I can have it both ways, then I'd love to just be able to give it away for free. And the people who can't or don't want to pay for it can read it there. and the people who want to buy it and own this physical copy can buy it. So it was just kind of felt win-win.
Totally awesome. Chris has 2 questions. Have you seen any change in your audience from drawing or inking more loosely to working in a tighter style? And with the tighter work being more labor intensive, is it opening up new opportunities?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't keep hard data on my, and it's also really hard to know because this book came out during COVID. I literally have not met in person a single person who has read it who I didn't already know. So no, but like in
Sure.
the physical space.
Right.
So, you know, so it's weird, but has it opened opportunities? Yeah, I guess so. But I'm not, I think I made it, and then I made a couple of comics for the Nib this past year. But I kind of stepped back from doing a lot of drawing. I was doing that nonprofit job and just kind of like writing prose and trying to figure out like what's next. So yeah.
Totally awesome. I'm shifting. I just finished I turned in a graphic novel and it's nonfiction. And now I'm starting an MFA in fiction and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
So every time you say, oh, I'm dabbling in prose, I'm like, oh, I gonna email you later and be like, just tell you how sweaty I've been lately. So someone else had a question, but that's good. I feel like I'm like, oh good, I'm not the only one out here doing this. Susan was wondering, do you have a Patreon or do you gather your readers into paying cohorts?
Yeah, I do have a Patreon. Lately, it's just been me like posting, you know, I'm taking a couple of storyboarding classes. So it's me being like, look, I did this weird Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles storyboard for a class I'm in.
Oh, amazing.
So if you ever want to see the weird, my weird take on Ninja Turtles. But yeah, I do have a Patreon. I also have I have a newsletter which has been fairly neglected for the last few months, but I was pretty good about it for a while, so I do intend to hop back on that. And if you go on my website, there's a place where you can subscribe there, and that's free. So
Nice. Okay. Is there anything we didn't ask you, or like I don't know if you've ever done this before, but like, are there questions people don't ask you that you wish they asked you?
oh boy. I don't know. That doesn't keep me up at night. So
Okay, good. Okay. We just want to make sure you're happy. I'm looking.
This is about you guys being happy. Who cares about my happiness?
This is a good crew.
I'm happy. I get to talk about my comics.
Oh yeah, we're very pleased to have you, and I think we have a lot of just general enthusiasts. Oh, someone's asking digital versus traditional.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
that's the whole question. Just question mark.
Well, I can speak on that.
Yes, that's your jam.
So I did a comic for the Nib, the drugs issue it's the latest issue, and it's the first comic that I've done that's fully digital. And it was fun. I mean, it was fun to be like, oh, I can figure out a way to draw this that I actually enjoy, and I can do it digitally. And it's not exactly the same way that I draw when I'm not working fully digitally, but it was cool. I think for my, I don't know if everything, I don't think everything's going to be 100% digital from here on out, but my previous comics have all been sort of not 50-50, but maybe like 70-30, where I ink them traditionally and then I scan them. And then I do digital tones, or I do like, if you look at the spot blacks in the Contradictions, the original pages are like very barren. They're just mostly line art, you know, with X's or whatever. So just like a
awesome.
And yeah, I just put in the spot blacks.
Even that wrist power. I know.
Yeah.
Cartoonists that are like, I can't anymore.
I use the mouse on my left hand, even though I'm right-handed now. That's one of my big brain.
You're like right up here. Wow, amazing. I taught with Aletha Martinez at SVA, and she holds her pencil a certain way. She does tons of stuff like Marvel and DC, so she's always drawing.
Yeah.
But she holds her pencil kind of sideways like this when
Yeah.
to protect her wrist, and she can just draw the pants off anyone. And I'm like, how do you? I don't know. Jeff was asking, can you talk a little bit more about like what specific tools to use digitally and what specific tools to use analog?
Sure. So
Love that stuff.
yeah. So analog for every book and mini comic up until the Contradictions, I drew on acid-free color printer paper. So it's like 90 grams or it's like 100 pounds or something.
Yeah.
So it's like smooth because it's the because it's like it's not glossy, but it's smooth.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit thicker. And what I would do there is I have a light box, and I would draw on a sheet and then take the same type of paper and just ink on the light box over that. And then for the Contradictions, I drew it on like 9x12 Strathmore 400 Bristol with Micron 01 pens.
You were not fucking around.
No fucking around here. I was like, this
you
is
put on
archival.
Your cartoonist hat. It's kind of funny. That's so great. Yeah, I love the way that like materials influence our attitude or vice versa. It's kind of great. Good question, Jeff. Yeah, everyone loves hearing about that. Stein was asking, how do you balance the content that you post on your website versus newsletter versus Patreon? Do you post the same content everywhere, or kind of segment where the content goes? How do you deal with that?
Well, okay, so I don't really post stuff on my website unless I'm like, here is a section that's a new book. I have tried to, you can see there's like one blog post from like 2 years ago.
Where's your Can You Revive Your Life journal? We'll just read that.
No, that is under lockdown. The place where I post the most is Patreon. Like I write like sort of a monthly musing, and then I just post whatever I've been working on. And then the newsletter is more, I'll post maybe like one piece of something that's on the Patreon or like a one comic. And then I usually give like 2 things that I've been reading or listening to or watching and some thoughts about it, and like two things that are related to something that I'm up to. So it's kind of, it has its own little format. And I try to keep it pretty short and sweet. And I kind of just don't, I don't really, I use social media just for like interacting with people at the moment, rather than trying to use it for promotion.
You heard over the din.
Yeah, it's, well, when I came out with the Contradictions, when I started the webcomic, I emailed a bunch of my friends, and I was like, and this was a humbling thing. I came with my hat in my hand, and I was like, I am going to start posting this webcomic. I'm going to tweet about it on this day at this time. Will you please retweet it? And like write something nice if you feel like it. That was awesome. that ended up being, so I was just saying, like, if you want to launch something and you want to use the internet, if you have not necessarily friends who have like boatloads of followers, although that's helpful, but just sort of, you can kind of run a mini social media campaign. If you're like, I'm launching a thing, I think it's worthwhile to put some time into sort of asking people for help. But
awesome. Thanks for answering all of our questions. We had so many. There was kind of a question about writing dialogue, especially in your journal comics. They're assuming that there's some editing and thought that goes into how you develop the dialogue in that instance. do you outline everything and then get more into detail about like what you remember, what was said? Or do you deal kind of straightforward, like write it as you go, like the dialogue specifically?
Yeah, I think I often, well, it depends. The journal comics sort of vary in, some of them are just like silent and some of them are just internal monologue and some of them are just a conversation. So I think it kind of, it depends on the rhythm. I think about rhythm a lot, I guess I would say, with dialogue. And I think using the same 6-panel structure for basically everything I do helps with that, because then I'm thinking about, okay, I have 6 panels. How do I break up the rhythm of this conversation? And so I think that sort of influences how I'm going to edit something. And I'm not walking around my life with a recording device. So everything is sort of as I remember it. And with the journalism stuff, I am walking around with a recorder. So that that stuff actually doesn't really have panels usually. So that's more like, finding sort of nuggets of conversation that are maybe more representational of a whole and extracting those.
Well, and then that kind of feeds into like that question reminds me of someone being like, I really want to get involved in political comics, but like, what if I get it wrong? Like, do you hold yourself like in your head? What's the conversation like when you're like, I have to get this? I need this to be the truth, even if it's not verbatim.
Well, I do try to get it as close to. I mean, when I edit, I don't add. I might subtract, like as you would in a news article, you would see an ellipses, I do that kind of thing. But I think the most important thing is when you're editing an actual conversation, that you're not changing the meaning of what a person is saying. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, you're like, I was there and I get the gist. So you have a certain amount of confidence in like getting that across. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Emma, do you have any other cues? We have some A's.
I don't think I have any more questions. I've kind of just been like thrilled to listen.
Anybody else like not into like typing, but just want to blurt something out or just shower Sophie with praise? Besides Em and I, because we're huge fangirls.
We can do that. I guess I did have a question that was maybe trying to clarify something that Elise asked, and maybe you already answered it and I kind of got lost thinking about something else you'd said, but so you go from like scripting to thumbnails to pencils to ink, or is there like you pick and choose how you're making?
For in general or for a particular type of comic?
I guess I'm asking, I know Elise's question was for the Contradictions, but I'm also curious about the work you've been doing for the Nib, because I'm assuming you're working as an editor at that point.
So for the Nib, I do script, but that's pretty much the only time that I, in the past, have gone to a script. And it is definitely, which has its pros and cons. I feel like the vast majority of my Nib pieces just have too much text, and for my taste. So the nice thing about thumbnailing and just going straight to drawing and writing as you're drawing is I feel like you get to have the rhythm, and you realize, oh, that's way too much text, or this is how much I can fit in. And so yeah, it's a bit of a struggle, a double-edged sword. But yeah, pretty much most of my comics have been just straight in, I draw the boxes and then I just pour the story into the boxes.
Until it overflows. Amazing. I guess one more question, which was from Susanna, about whether you hand letter or whether you're using like a type.
Yeah, for the Contradictions, I hand lettered it, and I've hand lettered everything in the past, but I was also doing stuff more loosely. For the Contradictions, I was, again, I like put on my cartoonist hat and I was like, I'm going to use a lettering guide.
Oh, no, it hurts. Ow.
So I used the lettering guide for the whole dang thing, and yeah, by the end of it, my hand definitely wanted to fall off. So I don't know. Yeah.
You digitally filled in those blacks, so haha.
But exactly. I was like, yeah. And by the end of it, oh, also with the contradictions, I forgot to mention my friend Chris Green, who is the person who went to SAW, he was my assistant on the contradictions. And so I had him filling in the blacks digitally for like the second half of the book because yeah, at a certain point I was like, oh, I'm not going to hit this deadline. Let's bring in a friend. And it was amazing. Wow. I'm like, oh my God, is this what having a colorist feels like?
A colorist. How bougie. I love it. That's when you know you've hit the big time. It's not the ISBN on Amazon. It's when you can recruit your friends to like give you compliments and make your stuff like even more awesome.
Yeah.
Everyone's like blowing up the chat saying thank you so much. Amazing. We love you. We're so excited. People's faces are melting off.
Oh no. Hold on to your faces.
In a good way. In a good way. I mean, it's hot out there. So it's better that it's art related. That's awesome. I'm just checking the chat. Did I miss anything? Y'all feel free to shout out. I wonder if there's anything I can think of. I'm curious about how you jump and leap from pictures to words only and from nonfiction to fiction, because I feel so terrified in my experience of this. And I'm at the precipice of fiction and I'm writing a short story right now and it sucks. It's terrible.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to like read short fiction and
reading is good. Yes.
Yeah.
You love reading books?
I do. I like reading books. Yeah.
Okay. Everyone around me reads like 700-page books, and
I don't. No.
I'm like all about the short fiction because I could get hit by a bus. I need to know how the story ends, so. And I read kind of slow. So yeah. So I just feel I have all this inadequacy stuff floating around my head. Like I'm not a real writer because I don't read War and Peace.
Oh no.
Do you have a favorite writer you've been reading, or anything that's been inspiring as you've been writing fiction?
My favorite. Well, so recently I've been rereading Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea series. Ursula Le Guin is my favorite writer. I mean, I've taught her book, Steering the Craft, and
Awesome.
I love her. She's amazing. So I've been rereading those. I've been rereading some Laurie Moore short stories lately. Yeah, that's kind of the two places where my
Solid picks. Solid picks. Sophie's reading list, y'all. Oprah better move over. Reese better move over. We got some reading. Yeah, I find that like a lot of the best cartoonists are multidisciplinary. Like, oh, I'm a cartoonist, but I also play saxophone or bass, or I write novels, or I paint, or I make quilts. Emma makes amazing quilts and paints. So everyone's good at like 40 things, and then just making comics. Jen Spencer loves Ursula too. Yes. Yes, lots of fans.
Yeah, I got to make a poster, Ursula Le Guin poster for the People's History series, the Just Seed series. I got to. They were like, "Who do you want to do?" And I was like, "Can I do Ursula Le Guin?"
Oh my God. I want to say last year, the United States Postal Service came out with an Ursula K. Le Guin stamp that you might still be able to
Actually, it just came out. It just came out.
Okay, good.
They've announced it a while ago, but it's out right now. You can get it right now.
Get them right now before they sell out. We'll send you some fan mail. Oh, Dante says the stamps are great. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes they have a good idea for a stamp, and then the artist is not so good. It's a gorgeous painting of her beautiful face. It's really good, and I love stamps in all caps. What do we miss, Emma? What do we miss? What do we do?
I feel like they're just like fun questions to ask now. Now I'm kind of like, what's your like ideal project? Like, if you had a dream that had no limits, what would it be? It doesn't have to be comics related either.
Well, my sort of dream thing for comics right now, something that I don't know when I'm going to do it, but something I would like to do that I would like to do a story, like a full color story in like the French album format. And probably like a silly like action adventure or like fantasy story. So that's that's kind of where I'm going right now. I'm just, I don't know. I'm not in a heavy mood. So I don't have the capacity. So I want to do something fun.
This is, maybe you don't have to answer this, but I wonder how much of that is like a response to like, the last 2 years, and how much of that is like a response to having finished your project. You know what I mean? Like, how that after you finish a comic, there's kind of that like, and like, I don't want to look at comics again. I don't want to think about comics again. Well, and this is all happening simultaneous to, being in quarantine, being kind of contained.
It's kind of been, it's been on my mind for a while, but it's a thing where I'm kind of like, after sort of my sort of traditional drawing chops got better doing the Contradictions, I'm kind of like, oh, I want to keep going. Like, this is extremely self-serving, but like, this is really fun. Like, I really love Christophe Blaine's comics. If any of y'all, his drawings are amazing, and his way of his sort of like rhythm in particular, I find just so compelling. And I just want to I don't know why.
No, that's so exciting, because what I'm hearing you describe is like a confidence and enthusiasm for comics, and I feel like that isn't mentioned enough. Like, I feel like there's a lot of like, oh, this is really hard, this is like, I'm struggling through this, but not enough like excitement and like, I'm ready for the next thing.
Well, I don't know when that's when I say, but the thing about that is, it's like selling an album format comic in North America.
Maybe Canada, they're like French adjacent. Maybe
that's right. True. There are some francophone publishers in Montreal who might publish it.
I think Tom's response to that would be like, oh, well, you're a comics artist for life. Like, there's no getting comics out of you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're talking about a French album style. You're doing this forever.
Yeah, I'm a lifer, for better or worse. I remember Frank Santoro at one point. I was at SPX and we were like hanging out, and I was like dithering about something, and he was like, "Oh, I'm not worried about you. You're a lifer."
Yay! That's a good compliment.
Maybe that's a good place to wrap things up. Thank you so much, Sophie, for being here. It's like been amazing to hear you like kind of speak more about your project, because I know you've been so generous over the last year, like doing podcasts and interviews. And thank you so much for joining us here. And thank you everyone for being here, and Jess for leading us through. I literally don't know what I would have done without you, so thank you. If I know this is kind of normally our slated time for getting together and talking and answering questions. So if anyone has any kind of course related questions, or just like general Mighty Network questions, I'll be here for like another half an hour or so. But that's kind of the end of our time with Sophie.
All right.
Thanks, Sophie. This was great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and super fun and nice to chat with y'all. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sophie.